The detective had watched the CCTV footage 16 times. Every frame. Every second. At first, it looked like another tragic road accident. A black Scorpio speeding down a busy Jaipur road. A woman stepping into its path. A violent collision. Case closed. Until, the detective paused the footage. Rewound it. Played it again. The SUV didn't lose control. It didn't suddenly swerve. According to investigators, it appeared to change direction. Not to avoid the woman, but to hit her. That single movement changed everything. Because if the driver had aimed at her, then this wasn't a traffic accident. It was murder. And if it was murder, someone had spent months making sure it looked like an accident. But investigators had no idea that the most shocking part of this case wasn't the driver. It was the person police would eventually accuse of planning the entire thing. A person Neeraj Sharma had trusted her entire life. Before we go any further, I want you to remember one question. How do you murder someone without anyone realizing they're being murdered? Because according to investigators, that's exactly what happened here. Not with poison. Not with a gun. Not with a knife. But with something millions of people see every day, a moving vehicle. July 3, 2026. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. 45-year-old Neeraj Sharma was doing something she had done countless times before. She had taken her 17-year-old specially abled son, Aryan, to his physiotherapy session. If you asked anyone who knew her, they would tell you the same thing. No matter what was happening in her own life, Aryan always came first. That routine never changed. And according to investigators, someone else knew that too. While Aryan was inside, Neeraj's phone rang. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Nobody standing nearby paid attention. Why would people answer phone calls every day? Neeraj stepped outside the clinic, looked down the road, and began walking. At almost the exact same moment, a black Scorpio entered the street. Seconds later, witnesses heard the impact. The SUV struck Neeraj with such force that her body was thrown dozens of feet before crashing onto the road. The driver never stopped. Within seconds, the vehicle disappeared. For the people who rushed toward her, it looked like a horrific hit and run. For police, that's exactly what it looked like too. At least, for the first few hours. Because then, something strange started happening. As detectives spoke with Neeraj's family, they weren't hearing the reactions you'd normally expect after a road accident. They kept saying something else. She told us this would happen. One relative after another repeated the same idea. Neeraj hadn't been afraid of reckless drivers. She had been afraid of someone. Someone she believed had been trying to kill her for months. Think about that. Imagine telling your family over and over. Someone wants me dead. And then, one day, you're killed by what appears to be a traffic accident. Coincidence or exactly what you were trying to warn everyone about at first? Even investigators weren't sure what to believe. People sometimes become convinced they're being followed, threatened, watched. Most of the time, those fears never turn into murder investigations. But this case was different. Because Neeraj hadn't just spoken about her fears. According to her family, she had documented them. She had photographed strange incidents, recorded videos, installed CCTV cameras around her home, strengthened security, and repeatedly told relatives that if something happened to her, it wouldn't be an accident. Now detectives had another question. What had frightened Neeraj so badly, that she believed someone was preparing to kill her? The answer would force investigators to look months into the past. Because according to investigators, this story didn't begin with Neeraj Sharma's death. It began inside her own family. And by the time detectives uncovered what had been happening behind closed doors, they would no longer be investigating one suspicious death. They would begin asking whether this family's tragedy had started much earlier. If you enjoy legal case breakdowns that follow evidence instead of headlines, consider subscribing. Every week, we break down real investigations piece by piece so you can see how detectives uncovered the truth. If Neeraj Sharma had died without ever telling anyone she felt threatened, this case might have ended as just another hit and run. But that's not what happened. Long before that black Scorpio ever appeared, Neeraj had been telling the same story to anyone who would listen. Someone was trying to frighten her. It started with small incidents. Late one night, stones suddenly crashed into the windows of her house. The next morning, nobody was there. A few days later, it happened again. Then again. Each time, whoever was responsible disappeared before anyone could identify them. Most people would probably blame local troublemakers. Teenagers looking for entertainment. A random act of vandalism. But then, the incidents became harder to explain. One morning, Neeraj walked outside and froze. Scattered across the entrance of her home was red vermilion powder. Beside it sat a coconut wrapped in sacred thread. Days later, someone left a black doll outside the same gate. Then came burnt pieces of clothing. The objects themselves weren't dangerous. But they carried a message. Someone wanted Neeraj to see them. Someone wanted her to react. The obvious explanation was superstition. Some neighbors reportedly believed someone was trying to scare her using rituals or black magic, but investigators would eventually look at these incidents very differently. They didn't believe the objects were important. They believed Neeraj's reaction was. According to investigators, Neeraj slowly changed the way she lived. She stopped going out unless she absolutely had to. Most groceries were delivered to the house. She avoided unnecessary travel. Friends later said she had become unusually cautious. She wasn't just scared. She believed she was being watched. And eventually, she started treating every strange incident as evidence. She photographed unusual objects. She recorded videos. She even called relatives after many of the incidents, saying the same thing over and over. Someone wants to kill me. At the time, those words sounded extreme. Her home became almost like a fortress. Additional iron fencing was installed. Multiple CCTV cameras covered the property. Every suspicious movement was documented. Imagine living like that. Checking outside before opening your own front door. Watching security footage from your own home. Wondering whether every unfamiliar face had been sent to watch you. The tragedy is, those precautions may have done something investigators never expected. They didn't stop the killers. They forced them to change their strategy. Because if Neeraj refused to leave home, then the attack would have to happen somewhere she couldn't avoid. She took her son Aryan to physiotherapy. She never skipped those appointments. She couldn't. Aryan depended on them. If someone had been studying Neeraj's routine, they would have known exactly where to find her. Exactly when she'd be outside. And exactly where CCTV coverage would be limited. Was that just another coincidence? Investigators didn't think so. They found something far more complicated. From the outside, the Sharma family looked completely ordinary. Neeraj lived in Jaipur with her daughter, Ayushi Sharma, and her 17-year-old specially abled son, Aryan. Her husband, VJ Sharma, had worked as a lower division clerk at the Rajasthan High Court. Relatives described them as a respectable middle-class family. No criminal history. No public scandals. Nothing that would explain why someone would allegedly spend months planning a murder. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. Because investigators believe the first cracks in this family appeared long before Neeraj ever feared for her life. Everything changed in December 2024. It was an ordinary working day when VJ Sharma suddenly collapsed. Doctors later confirmed he had suffered a massive brain hemorrhage. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. For several days, his family wasn't sure he would survive. The prognosis was grim. Even if he lived, his life would never be the same. And for Neeraj, that meant everything changed overnight. She suddenly found herself caring for a critically ill husband, raising a specially abled son, and trying to hold the family together. It was a burden no one ever expects to carry. Against all odds, VJ survived. But recovery came at a terrible cost. According to medical records cited during the investigation, he remained largely bedridden. He required constant care. A feeding tube. Regular medication. Almost every basic need depended on someone else. Doctors believed recovery would take months. His family believed time would heal him. Instead, VJ suddenly disappeared from everyone's lives. According to relatives, Ayushi insisted her father should receive treatment at another hospital. She reportedly argued that he would receive better care elsewhere. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. Any daughter would want the best possible treatment for her father. But investigators later found one detail impossible to ignore. Once VJ left, almost no one saw him again. Think about that. A man survives a life-threatening brain hemorrhage. He's moved to another hospital. Weeks pass. Then months. Yet relatives don't know exactly where he's being treated. No regular visits. No updates from doctors. No medical discussions with the wider family. Just repeated assurances that he's recovering. For detectives, that timeline would later become one of the most important parts of the entire investigation. Nearly 3 months later, the family received another phone call. This time, they were told to come to a private hospital immediately. When they arrived, they barely recognized VJ. According to investigators, his condition had deteriorated dramatically. Doctors reportedly found multiple severe complications. His heart, his lungs, his liver. Everything had worsened. Despite emergency treatment, VJ Sharma died. At the time, his death was accepted as a tragic medical outcome. No criminal case. What really happened during those missing months? VJ's death left behind more than grief. It left behind responsibility. His government job suddenly became vacant. Under Rajasthan's compassionate appointment policy, an eligible family member could apply to fill the position. At first, this looked like a routine administrative process. A way to help a grieving family regain financial stability. But detectives believe that decision quietly became the beginning of a much deeper conflict. Because there wasn't just one eligible family member. There were two. Neeraj and her daughter, Ayushi. According to investigators, Ayushi wanted the job. But so did Neeraj. From Neeraj's perspective, the decision seemed obvious. She was now responsible for supporting the household. Aryan required lifelong care. Medical expenses weren't going away. A stable government salary could secure their future. Eventually, Neeraj received the appointment. To outsiders, it looked like the practical decision. But detectives would later learn, not everyone inside the family accepted it so easily. Then came another issue. Property. Investigators learned that the Sharma family wasn't arguing over a single house. They allegedly owned multiple valuable assets, including ancestral property worth several crores. Money has a strange way of changing family relationships. Discussions become disagreements. Disagreements become arguments. Arguments become resentment. And according to people close to the family, resentment had quietly begun replacing trust. No one imagined where it would eventually lead. But detectives would later say this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about something far more personal. Because the investigation was about to uncover relationships inside the family that shocked even experienced police officers. And once those relationships came to light, the motive behind Neeraj Sharma's murder finally started making sense. Investigators weren't convinced Neeraj Sharma had been killed by chance. They believed someone had been watching her, studying her routine, waiting for the perfect opportunity. But one question still remained. Who benefited from her death? The answer, according to detectives, was much closer than anyone expected. As officers interviewed relatives, a pattern slowly began to emerge. Different people remembered different arguments. Some mentioned disagreements over VJ's government job. Others spoke about inherited property. A few described constant tension inside the family after VJ's death. Individually, none of those arguments proved anything. Families argue. Brothers disagree. Parents and children fight. That's normal. But detectives weren't looking at one argument. They were looking at dozens. And together, they painted a picture of a family that had been falling apart long before Neeraj was killed. Then investigators decided to do something simple. Instead of asking, who wanted Neeraj dead? They asked, who had the most to gain if Neeraj was no longer alive? That one question completely changed the investigation. If Neeraj died, who would control the government job, who would influence the family's property, who would decide Aryan's future, who would suddenly have far fewer obstacles standing in the way for detectives. Those weren't accusations. They were starting points. And one name kept appearing in almost every conversation. Ayushi Sharma. At first, officers still weren't convinced. Suspicion isn't evidence. They needed something real. Something that could be verified. So they turned to what modern investigations almost always turn to first. Digital evidence. Phone records. Location data. Call histories. Hours of CCTV footage. Investigators began reconstructing the movements of everyone connected to Neeraj. Who spoke to whom? Who met whom? Who was where? Slowly, a hidden network of connections began appearing. One particular phone number appeared again, and again, and again. It belonged to Balram Sharma. At first, that wasn't surprising. Balram was a relative. Family members talk. But detectives noticed something unusual. The frequency of those conversations. The timing. And the pattern. According to investigators, the communication went far beyond what they'd expect between ordinary relatives. That discovery pushed detectives in an entirely new direction. As questioning continued, investigators uncovered an allegation that stunned even experienced officers. According to the police investigation, Ayushi Sharma and Balram Sharma weren't simply cousins. Police alleged they were involved in a romantic relationship. Not distant relatives. First cousins. Investigators further alleged the two had been living together and were planning a future together. If true, it completely changed how detectives viewed everything they'd uncovered. The property dispute. The government job. The constant arguments. None of them looked isolated anymore. They looked connected. Now ask yourself something. If investigators are right, and two people believe their future depends on removing every obstacle in front of them, how far are they willing to go? According to police, that question would soon have a horrifying answer. Because once the first arrests were made, the entire conspiracy allegedly began to unravel. And what the suspects told police would transform this case from a suspected family murder into one of the most shocking criminal conspiracies Rajasthan had seen in years. For weeks, detectives had been collecting fragments. Phone records. CCTV footage. Location data. Witness statements. Individually, none of it proved a conspiracy. But together, it began telling a story. A story that police say had been unfolding for months. And according to investigators, it all came down to one day. July 3, 2026. You'll remember, Neeraj hadn't left the physiotherapy clinic on her own. She walked outside, only after answering a phone call. At first, detectives believed that call was just another coincidence. Until they traced it. According to the investigation, everything after that happened within minutes. The alleged lookout confirmed Neeraj's location. The information was passed along. And then, the black Scorpio started moving. Police allege the SUV wasn't randomly driving through that area. It was already waiting. Waiting for one signal. One confirmation. One opportunity. Witnesses later described the impact as terrifying. The SUV accelerated. Changed direction. And struck Neeraj before disappearing from the scene. Within seconds, the operation was over. Then, the first arrests began. According to police, once investigators confronted the accused with CCTV footage, phone records, and each other's statements, the story allegedly started falling apart. One statement led to another. One name led to another. Piece by piece, detectives say they reconstructed the entire plan. Investigators allege that Ayushi Sharma was not simply aware of what was going to happen. Police claim she was the person coordinating it. The alleged mastermind. The person who connected everyone else. If those allegations are true, it means Neeraj wasn't killed by strangers. According to investigators, the conspiracy was allegedly directed by her own daughter. But detectives say Ayushi didn't act alone. Police allege Balram Sharma, Mohit Sharma, Mohan Svarup, and several others each played different roles in carrying out the plan. One allegedly helped coordinate communication. Another allegedly arranged logistics. Others allegedly assisted in tracking Neeraj's movements and executing the attack. If you enjoy detailed legal case breakdowns that focus on evidence, investigation, and the courtroom, not rumors or sensationalism, subscribe to the channel. And before you go, tell us what you think. If Neeraj's earlier complaints and the alleged first attack had triggered a deeper investigation, do you believe this tragedy could have been prevented?